好，大家好，多謝大家嚟到花旗銀行Facebook Live 逆境投資錦囊。大家好努力對抗疫情啦，係咪？但係今年嗰個市場波動性都高㗎。年頭就加息啦，最近亦都有地緣政治事件影響。希望今日可以同大家分享翻多啲咧我哋嘅睇法。我係花旗銀行投資策略及環球財富策劃部主管廖家豪卡。今日咧除咗我之外咧，亦都好開心啦，請到我哋花旗私人銀行亞太區首席投資策略師彭程 Ken Peng 同我哋一齊分享下嘅。Well, Ken, welcome and thanks so much for your time. 好
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
好，好嗱，大家一定會好關心疫情啦，係咪？疫情最近嗰個即係新增確診都不斷上升啦，又影響生活，亦都有機會影響生計。無可避免咧，短期嘅啲陣痛係即係一定會有㗎啦。雖然政府我哋見到出咗一啲防疫嘅措施啦，但係就住最新嘅一啲即係出行限制啊，我哋亦都相應咧調低咗香港咧喺今年第一季嘅經濟增長啦，有機會按年咧可能倒退咧大約1.2% 左右。全年嗰個經濟增長咧有機會可能咧就增長2.5%，咁都比之前慢咗啲嘅。係啦，喺咁嘅情況底下，Covid 即係咪真係對中港股市個影響中長線係咪真係咁大咧？Ken 可唔可以幫我同我哋分享下？
Okay, sure. Allow me to use English. So we clearly need to be expecting a tough few weeks ahead, going into this compulsory testing and the associated limitations to mobility. So actually, it would be great if we can show slide 2 in our deck. So now COVID-0 policies, as annoying as they are, they did manage to help reduce the number of deaths. So if you see on the right side table here, so far this year, there's actually, this table is from about 4 days ago. So far this year, now it's over 500,000 people have died globally from COVID. And, in China and Hong Kong, now the number reaches to about 500, just over 500. So basically 1 in 1,000 deaths because of COVID comes from China, including Hong Kong. So that's it's something that's worthwhile. Is it worth your freedom? That's for everyone to judge. But I think we don't need to be totally negative about this whole situation. As Ka noted, the reduction to mobility is going to hurt Hong Kong's GDP in the first quarter. It is likely to be shrinking by over 1%. But if we can go to slide 3, the markets already have figured that out, right? Over the past year, Hong Kong equities have corrected pretty deeply. A lot of that has to do with the tightening in China, but also has to do with the inability to reopen. Now, so even if we see a -1%, -1 to -2% decline in GDP, we're likely to see markets actually already have priced that in quite a bit. And then you look at the right side charts. Hong Kong's HSI is trading at a price to book value of under 1 times. And each time when we got to that point, right, it's actually led to a pretty substantial rebounds. Yes, the longer trend still looks pretty negative, but these rebounds can be 20 or even 40% in size. So cheap valuations, and then we have the lockdown, right? So people are stuck at home. There's policy stimulus, so they get a little bit of cash, and then there's likely to be some reopening hopes after this this current wave is done, and this current wave will pass, right? Because every spring we'll see the number of COVID cases decline just naturally. So you put those 3 things together: lockdown, policy stimulus, and potential reopening possibly in the summer. Then that's not a bad outlook, right? So I would stay positive on Hong Kong. Ka?
Okay, thank you, Ken. 頭先 Ken 提過就係其實都唔使太過悲觀嘅，即係香港總體疫情上面咧，其實對比環球情況都做得好啦，都好有賴大家啦。其實一路都好即係好緊守崗位啦，係咪？咁啊個疫情控制咧先相對上比其他國家嚟得好嘅。咁啊同埋即係香港嘅股市咧，某程度上之前都反映咗之前嗰個即係衰退嘅擔心啦。即係就算可能一季嗰個增長可能有機會放慢或者倒退，其實對整體個股市咧可能嘅影響都唔係太大，因為已經即係反映咗啦。咁啊，再加埋其實即係而家再睇翻，可能再憧憬翻嚟緊重開啦，係咪？即係可能去到可能大概可能年中嘅時候，咁啊疫情控制嘅情況底下咧，咁可能開始會變翻，會啲活動開始活躍翻嘅時候，咁變相政策亦都配合，即係內地嘅政策都支持啦。咁啊香港亦都可能個經濟活力再喺度啦。咁另外個估值咧，頭先阿 Ken 亦都提到，而家咧香港嗰個市漲率咧，其實喺即係中港即係兩地三個指數嚟講咧，都係最低嘅。咁過去即係當個市漲率去到呢啲咁嘅情況，即係大概喺1倍咁樣呢啲水平嘅時候咧，其實嗰個反彈力度咧都真係唔可以睇小。咁所以其實即係變相又唔需要話太過悲觀嘅。咁啊，除咗頭先譬如 Ken 提到嘅一啲重點之外啦，咁其實我哋亦都見到咧喺整體個疫情個發展嗰度咧，有一啲比較正面啲嘅一啲跡象嘅，就係咩咧？其實譬如喺香港啦，嗰個零售嗰個需求啊，其實個復甦進度其實幾唔錯嘅。咁啊，大家都知道過去1-2年咧，其實基本上都冇乜訪港旅客啦。大家個圖見到啦，深藍色咧訪港旅客嗰個數字咧，基本上係即係直線下滑㗎啦。咁但係淺藍色嗰個，譬如話零售銷售嗰個數字咧，睇到其實即係 Covid 爆嗰陣時咧，係谷底之後咧，其實你見到個進度係唔錯，即係喺冇外來冇訪港旅客嘅情況底下，本地嘅消費咧其實支撐得幾好嘅。咁所以其實我哋自己都幾相信香港嘅經濟實力同埋個消費能力咧。咁所以我哋覺得下半年香港整體嗰個經濟嗰個增長咧，有機會去翻5.1%。咁而喺外國咧，疫情對嗰個需求冇影響呢個跡象咧，其實係更加明顯嘅。即係例如美國係啦，大家都知道而家美國嗰個新增確診數字咧，都可能講緊係幾萬宗嘅。係啦，咁大家見到呢度其實對總體嘅消費又點咧？美國係咪？咁嗱你喺呢個圖上面大家見到咧，其實藍色下邊一條條嗰啲咧係咩咧？就係美國嘅新增確診數字。係啦，咁其實一路都枕住向上升嘅。係啦，尤其最近年尾啦嚇，咁因為可能即係 Omicron 嘅關係啦。咁但係左手邊個機票開支，即係搭飛機嘅開支又好，或者係右手邊出街食飯嘅開支都好咧，其實都係升緊嘅喎。嗱，大家見到個圖可能向下跌，以為佢跌啦，個使少咗啦，其實唔係嘅，個圖調翻轉嘅。係啦，你越係向下，即係代表越使得多嘅。係啦，咁即係其實喺總體嘅需求上面咧，其實係冇特別少到嘅。而甚至大家可以留意咧，喺出街食飯嘅時候咧，即係食飯嗰邊嗰個開支咧，其實而家呢刻同 Covid 之前咧係差唔多㗎啦，已經係啦。咁之前曾經試過翻到去疫情前嘅水平添。咁所以其實我哋見到其實整體疫情咧對總體嘅需求唔係話影響得咁緊要，而真正影響得犀利係啲咩咧？就係個供應係啦，無論係人手短缺啊、零件短缺啊，甚至係運輸嘅成本咧，其實都因為嗰個即係個供應問題咧而拉高咗。咁供應追唔到需求，好簡單，啲嘢就貴啦。即係好似啱啱過去嗰個 weekend 咁樣啦，即係落去街市買啲餸，諗住煲湯咧，聽得最多係啲咩咧？就係問點解啲嘢貴得咁緊要？咁而喺歐美市場咧，其實喺呢方面咧，俾我哋嘅即係喺物價上升嘅感受咧，其實係更加深嘅。咁所以總體嚟講，其實疫情係會過去嘅，係會緩和，係會有終點嘅。咁但係調翻轉頭，我哋見到咧，總體嗰個物價上漲嗰個解決嗰個未必會咁短時間裏邊可以解決得到。咁對投資者嚟講咧，就可能會有一個即係可能中期少少嘅問題啦。咁提到物價，咁一定唔可以唔講美國啦，係咪？咁美國最近嗰個物價增長速度咧，其實係按40年以嚟咧最快嘅速度去增長嘅。係啦，咁大家可以見到，譬如一啲核心嘅商品價格咧，其實好似即係反地心吸力咁樣㗎，係啦，即係大家可以睇下一個核心嘅商品價格嗰個表現啦。其實最近期甚至係按年咧係升12%嘅，係啦。咁調翻轉頭而受之前疫情影響嘅一啲服務業嘅一啲價格咧，其實最近亦都係起翻上嚟。咁即係其實調翻轉頭咁令到市場真係好擔心啦。喂會唔會又加速咁收水咧？又加息咁又縮表咧？係啦，咁令到即係個美股今年個整體表現都麻麻地啦。係啦，咁但係其實我哋自己覺得諗深一層，美國本身如果你啲嘢冇市場冇需求，其實你點樣加其實都冇人理你噶嘛，係咪？即係你唔會賣得出噶嘛。咁所以我哋覺得其實整體美國嘅通脹係嚟自真係本土需求係真係強勁嘅。 咁如果你真係啲嘢貴咗，但係你荷包唔深嘅話咧，其實你又買唔起嘅。咁貴得到又買得到咧，其實某程度上反映緊美國嘅經濟咧整體表現係唔錯嘅，所以其實係有一個合理性去加息喺裏邊。咁我哋自己睇可能譬如美國今年出年可能總共會加1.75至2厘咁樣啦。咁好啦，咁但係市場都真係驚啦，因為加息啊嘛，係咪？即係驚流動性減少啊，或者一啲不穩定因素。咁加息本身，即係 Ken，你又覺得喺呢方面係咪真係對股市係一個洪水猛獸或者一個好負面嘅因素咧？咁呢方面你又點睇咧？
Well, look, I think we are in the middle part of this business cycle, and at that time, when the Fed raises interest rates in the middle of a business cycle, the impact on equities, on growth, is actually limited. So let's turn to page 7 on this deck. I think this is a very interesting observation here, right? So we are looking at here, this dark blue line here is NASDAQ 100 forward PE. Its valuation for the large cap tech stocks listed in the US. And the light blue line is the 10-year TIPS yield. That's the inflation protected securities, treasury inflation protected securities. And that reflects what the market believes real interest rates are. Real interest rates are basically the 10-year yield minus inflation expectations. Okay, so this light blue line is on the inverted scale on the right side. And since the start of this year, that has risen by 60 basis points from minus 1.1 to now minus 50 basis points. And the NASDAQ valuation came down, compressed because of that rise in real interest rates. And the logic for that is because you're a high growth company, right? How much money you make in 5 or 10 years is very important. And the market does a discount for that future earning to the present day. And that discount rate just went up substantially. And that is why we're seeing the compression in tech stock, well, particularly growth stock valuations. Now, when does this end? When long-term interest rates peak, that's basically when 10-year yields kind of find a top level and start to stabilize or come back down. When might that happen? Actually, that typically happens at the start of rate hikes. So once the Fed feels confident enough to start raising rates, particularly if they're very aggressive, then long-term inflation expectations come down pretty quickly, and that brings interest rates to stabilize. And when that happens, you will no longer get this valuation compression for your tech or high growth stocks. Now, we're not quite there yet, but almost, especially if the Fed raises by 50 basis points, say in March. Now, if Ukraine situation kind of hurts growth prospects, I think the Fed will also take it easier, and the market will have a lower assessment for future growth and inflation, and that also brings long-term interest rates down. So again, after this substantial correction we've seen this year, we should be looking for opportunities going to pick up back on sustainable growth types of investments. Actually, if I just make another point on page 8, this is quite important, right? I talked about how we're in the middle of business cycle. So when we look at past 4 Fed rate hike cycles, the one in 1994 and 1999 were dramatically different from the ones in 2004, 2015. Why? Because in 94, when the Fed started hiking, Asia was about to enter a financial crisis, right? So the performance of equities during that time was terrible. That was at the end of that cycle. 1999 was right before the dot-com bubble busted, and that was the end of that cycle. And so those 2 episodes, the performance of equities were pretty bad. And then you look at 2004, 2015, both of these were mid-cycle rate hikes, similar to where we think we are now. And after 1 year after the first rate hike, the S&P was higher. Asia ex Japan was even outperformed the S&P. And so, this time we think that things might be a little bit better. But of course, in the second half of this year, we're likely to experience some quantitative tightening as the Fed shrinks its balance sheet. But we think that's probably going to be more of a concern, say this time next year, rather than immediately. So basically, we see this year, we've had a significant correction, and we may be going into some opportunities soon. So let me pause there. Back to you, Kyle.
唔該 Ken， thanks。哇，咁Ken 頭先提過咧，其實因為我哋覺得其實整體嗰個美國經濟嗰個增長咧，而家係嗰個週期去到一個中期嘅階段。咁當過去經驗睇到咧，其實美國嗰個經濟增長去到一個復甦階段嘅中期嘅話咧，其實原來加息對整體嗰個股市嗰個影響咧，其實係有限嘅。係啦，咁今年年初到而家啲科技股高估值嘅股票，咁始終係因為受制於嗰個利率嗰個調整啦，或者嗰個預期咧係重新去調整嘅話咧，其實係有啲即係估值嘅壓力喺裏邊。咁但係頭先 Ken 都有提過啦，其實呢啲估值壓力幾時會消退咧？就係會唔會就係可能當聯儲局加息嘅時候，開始加息嘅時候咧，其實呢啲壓力咧就會開始慢慢消退啦。點解咧？最主要嘅原因就係因為個聯儲局開始加息，咁市場咧對加息嗰步伐咧預期其實都已經開始即係七七八八㗎啦。咁所以其實當嗰個預期穩定咗之後咧，咁其實就會可能重回翻一啲基本因素，或者睇下佢個增長嘅情況。咁而頭先 Ken 亦都 share 咗啦，喺過去咧即係1994年到99年啊，或者係04年15年咧加息週期嘅時候咧，尤其喺2004同2015年咧，嗰個經濟環境同而家呢一刻都係比較接近嘅，都係咧復甦嘅中期嚟嘅，係啦。咁當時你見到咧，即係頭先阿 Ken 亦都有提過，其實喺咁嘅環境底下咧，加息咧對整體個股市表現咧，其實又唔係真係咁一面倒地咁擔心，係啦。咁所以呢度希望可以俾多啲唔同嘅資訊大家啦。咁但係始終個市都真係跌咗，係咪？個市都真係跌嘅。咁但係即係市場成日都擔心，我成日都想人棄我取咁樣啦。咁其實又係咪時候咧？係咪？即係呢方面有啲數據都可以同大家分享下啦。咁其實而家呢一刻美國個消費信心指數咧，其實由最近高位90左右咧，就跌到去大約70咁嘅水平。咁其實呢個係咩概念咧？咁其實原來由1980年到而家啦嚇，咁其實總共咧有382次咧美國嘅消費者信心咧，其實係喺70到99呢個區間裏邊嘅。咁而我哋睇到當真係呢個真係消費信心比較低嘅時候咧，原來1年之後美股嗰個平均回報咧，大概咧都有10%。咁如果個消費信心再低啲啦，好似去到譬如見到0至69咁樣，咁你見到個回報咧係再高啲嘅。咁即係簡單嚟講咧，其實而家呢一刻咧，可能消費者個信心可能相對上比較悲觀少少，咁可能對投資者嚟講咧，可能會係一啲機會嚟嘅。好啦，咁講到機會啦，咁亦都唔可以唔提今年嘅中港股市啦嚇。今年中港股市亦都係做得比較即係令人意外啦，係咪？咁跑贏美股啦，因為始終上年都真係好令人好失望嘅嚇，即係睇都唔想睇㗎啦。係啦，咁但係即係大家都經歷咗咁多次啦，咁其實今年個中國股市又係彈完就散啦，定係都真係有啲值得期待嘅地方咧？咁阿 Ken 你又點睇咧？即係喺中港股市嗰度。
Okay, sure. So I think a lot of this is driven by policy in China, right? Whether policy in China is strong enough to restore growth and restore confidence in the markets will decide how Hong Kong, China markets perform. And we're pretty optimistic on that. Now, let's go to, say, page 10 on our deck. So this year, you might have heard about this already. It's the 20th Party Congress. It is likely to take place in October. And I just want to show you this. During years of Party Congress, right? So back in 2017, 2012, 2007, these were years where credit growth is very strong. So those diamonds, those light blue diamonds, represent credit impulse in China. So basically how much overall credit grows as a share of GDP. And the dark blue bars, they are the MSCI China index returns for those years. So you can see that during the Congress years, both are positive. In the during the in-between years, the credit impulse is typically low to negative. Now, 2009, 2020 were exceptions because of the global financial crisis and the pandemic. But generally speaking, the in-between years were pretty bad. We just had one of those last year. And so now, this year, we already seen in January that the credit impulse is rebounding pretty aggressively. And next slide, please. When the credit impulse rebounds, it typically means that the valuation for Chinese equities gets repaired. Now, that's the repair is relatively gradual, but that's okay, right? We want to have a more stable, slowly recovery market rather than some crazy bull. But then why have we not seen better performance in China, particularly in e-commerce, internet names? Part of that is because earnings still have not rebounded. Expectations, analyst estimates are not being revised up just yet because China's consumption situation is still pretty poor because of COVID and because of COVID zero strategy to restrict people's consumption potential. So we do think that China is trying to find alternatives to COVID zero, and perhaps we'll see more evidence of that in the second half of the year. We already talked about how credit is easing, and we're going to see the National People's Congress beginning this Saturday. We're going to see what kind of growth they are targeting. We think at least 5%, which will require a lot of work. And how do they plan to get to that target? How to ring fence risks in the real estate market, how to contain risks of COVID zero policies, and how to restore investor confidence by being more stable on the regulation front, right? So there's a lot of things that needs to happen, and I think they are already on the policy agenda, but I think it probably takes time for the policy stance to change and then into implementation and then affect markets. So that's why we remain relatively positive on Chinese equities, and it's likely to be a positive side for Hong Kong as well. Back to you, Ka.
唔該 Ken， 好咁啊，簡單嚟講，政策兩個字係啦，咁啊，即係點解繼續中港股票都可以值得留意咧？政策係啦，咁其實頭先阿 Ken 提過，今年其實係第20屆嘅黨代表大會啦。咁睇翻過去經驗咧，無論係17、12甚至係07啦、12同埋17年咧，其實每一年嘅黨代表大會咧，其實喺嗰個總體嗰個信貸嗰個增長咧，其實都見到有喺裏邊嘅，係啦，即係簡單嚟講都有放水啦，係啦，咁啊亦都有嗰啲比較即係一啲信貸嘅政策係支持，咁而每一年咧其實個總體個回報咧都唔錯嘅，係啦，咁雖然今年而家呢一刻個即係仲未翻嚟啦，即係可能個市場氣氛仲未翻啦，咁最主要就因為啲盈利咧其實仲係需要時間咧去恢復翻個信心喺度，咁但係因為始終即係嚟緊喺政策上面嘅支持嘅憧憬都大啦，尤其可能喺內房即係購房嘅政策又好，或者係啲消費嘅支持嘅政策都好咧，即係嚟緊都可能會陸續有更加多嘅措施會出台，咁所以其實喺今年嘅下半年咧，咁呢方面會更加清晰嘅，咁所以其實整體嚟講，今年因為有呢個黨代表大會，咁變相市場喺嗰個嗰個信貸政策嗰度咧係相對上偏鬆嘅，咁而喺過去經驗見到，當整體嗰個中國嗰個信貸量佔 GDP 嘅比例係即係提高嘅話咧，咁其實呢個對總體嗰個 MSCI 個中國或者中國股票整體個估值咧，亦都有一個提振嘅作用喺裏邊嘅。好啦，咁但係頭先提過啦，政策係一個好重要嘅一個因素啦。咁但係其實政策即係簡單嚟講喺嗰個本身嗰個放水量或者嗰個寬鬆程度係咪真係有改善到咧？咁呢度可以俾大家睇翻少少即係資料啦。咁其實由上年年尾開始咧，係啦，大家可以見到呢個表啦。其實由上年年尾開始，深藍色嘅一個港義貨幣嘅一個增長嗰個指標咧，其實開始咬腰咧係向上升翻㗎啦。咁係透過啲咩推動咧？就係透過一個社會融資嘅增長去推動嘅。咁乜嘢係社會融資咧？簡單嚟講就係金融機構係啦，透過可能信貸市場、債券市場、股票市場去 俾一啲資金咧落去一啲實體經濟嗰度。咁即係話其實金融機構有冇放水俾錢係啦，融資落去啲實體經濟活動嗰度。咁你見到咧，其實個社會融資增長係即係向上嘅。咁而無論係嗰個廣義貨幣又好，或者係社會融資都好咧，其實你見到個增長勢頭同過去一年一路咁樣跌咧，其實係兩個大方向嚟嘅。係啦，咁另外雖然而家見到貸款增長咧係仲未開始即係恢復啦，係啦，咁但係我哋覺得其實今年整體內地嗰個房地產市場可能去到5、6月嘅時候咧開始會穩定翻，而我哋亦都自己覺得咧喺今年上半年咧，中國係會減呢個政策利率0.25%，存款準備金可能會再減多0.5%，咁呢啲都可能有機會刺激翻個貸款需求嘅。係啦，咁所以整體嗰個信貸嗰個增長量咧，有機會恢復即係會可能會維持一幾唔錯嘅增長喺裏邊。咁而調翻轉頭，我哋見到市場資金咧，亦都開始對中國股票嘅資產咧開始有興趣。由上年年尾開始咧，我哋見到譬如大家見到喺淺藍色係啦，喺上面淺藍色嗰個趨勢嗰度見到啦嚇。其實呢個係整體流入去中國股票 ETF， 即係一啲交易所買賣基金嘅資金嚟嘅。咁其實由上年年尾開始咧，流入去個速度咧，其實都去到差唔多300億美金。咁你見到係過去10年以嚟一個比較快嘅速度去增長。咁你就算升咗咁多都好咧，睇翻下邊深藍色嗰個線咧，其實睇翻其實佔整體嗰個資產規模咧，整體個基金資產規模咧，其實都未去翻之前15、16年嗰啲高位。係啦，咁可能投資者都相信今年整體嗰個中國嗰個政策同外國比較唔同嘅地方就係個可變嗰個即係個機會比較細，咁疊加埋而家呢刻個估值亦都比較低，咁息率亦都比較吸引，咁所以變相整體個中國股市或者中港股市咧，其實即係都可能繼續係有個機會喺裏邊。係啦，咁即係總結翻少少啦，咁其實疫情咧冇錯係會有啲短期嘅陣痛嘅，咁但係大家一路 keep 住努力啊，繼續可能譬如話去即係緊守翻自己崗位，咁其實呢個係會過去嘅，係會舒緩得到嘅。咁但係投資者反而更加要小心咧，啲中長期嗰啲物價上升嘅壓力咧，令點樣影響自己嗰個投資組合啦。咁而過去經驗亦都睇得到咧，其實美國個加息嗰個亦都唔係話真係對整體個股票市場或者環球股票市場咧係一個洪水猛獸嚟嘅。係啦，咁所以變相其實亦都唔使話太過真係好驚嗰美國個加息個情況係咪真係咁一面倒嚟睇差咧？係啦，咁而中港市場咧，其實我哋亦都預期係繼續受惠到一啲比較偏穩嘅一啲，無論係財政政策又好，或者係貨幣政策都好咧，咁其實都係應該係會受惠得到，今年都仲係繼續有機會喺裏邊嘅。係啦，咁所以其實總體嚟講，即係今日個分享就暫時去到呢度啦。咁睇下大家咧，如果有啲咩問題，係啦，咁可以咧。不妨而家呢刻咧就可以喺個 Facebook 嗰度咧，咁啊可以留低，咁我哋睇下可以睇下即係點樣可以即係喺呢度點樣 adjust 翻大家嗰啲問題啦。好，咁我見到其實都有講開打仗啦，係咪？即係個衝突啦。咁又會唔會即係係咪要入啊？或者係咪會對個股票市場有幾大影響啦？嗱咁好，咁先請下 Ken 先。Ken, what do you think about the recent conflict on the equity and how it would affect the economy?
Yes. So, well, it really depends on which economy you're talking about or which equity. So, I think this Ukrainian situation is very unfortunate. It's a terrible thing happening on the ground in Ukraine now. We think that this the amount of sanctions that are being put onto Russia is unprecedented, right? And on a country of this size and of such importance to the global energy supply chain. And then Russia's response to these sanctions also increase risks towards financial institutions, particularly in Europe. So, if we can, if this crisis can be contained, relatively soon, meaning, if Russia and Ukraine reach some sort of, sustainable ceasefire, then I think this the impact on markets would be fairly brief, and we probably have seen most of it already. But of course, now events are such that the risks of other outcomes is higher. So I think we should take a relatively defensive, or at least a barbell approach to investing during this time. What is a barbell? First and foremost, we want to manage risk and keep portfolios relatively stable. And to do that, U.S. Treasury, medium to long-term U.S. Treasury, plus investment grade bonds. And I think this will help to provide a buffer if, in case the impact on growth spills over from more than just Europe, right? So that's one end of the barbell. The other end is to try to capture more alpha in economies and industries that are less affected or that benefit from this crisis. For example, cybersecurity. This is something that we've highlighted as an unstoppable trend at the start of this year. And we like it a lot because it's had a significant correction and it has very good long-term prospects. And now it has an even more immediate positive catalyst because of, all the countries and companies around the world are afraid of cyber attacks, stemming from this conflict. And so, aside from that, I think fintech, and also healthcare, and also consumer staples, like food, retail, these are likely to be pretty resilient industries in this crisis, and quality companies in these industries are likely to perform well. We also talked about how China is in a policy and it's low value, cheap value, and so yeah, these this year when the whole world is dealing with a lot of uncertainty.
好 ，thanks Ken。好，咁頭先 Ken 提到啦，咁好大機會其實即係當然而家個事態發展都唔同啦嚇，咁即係希望即係當然盡快可以解決得到啦。咁但係其實喺咁嘅情況底下，無論向邊個方向走啦，咁其實嗰個應該都係採取一個比較防守性啦，或者係比較平衡少少嘅一個方向嘅。平衡嘅意思係咩咧？一部分其實而家呢一刻咧即係自從即係之前喺加息嘅即係壓力底下啦嚇，一啲可能中期嘅一啲國債咧，美國國債咧，其實已經即係俾人即係俾市場沽得都幾厲害㗎啦。咁變相可能而家呢一刻係有啲投資價值喺裏邊嘅。係啦，咁變相喺一個比較平衡啲嘅一個策略上面，一邊可以係即係可以考慮一啲可能係一啲美國嘅一啲中期嘅國債啦，係啦，或者啲優質企業嘅國債啦，或者優質企業嘅即係優質企業嘅債券啦，係啦，咁即係喺呢度即係令到個整體個組合嗰個穩定性高啲啦。咁而另外一邊增長嗰度可以留意翻啲咩大方向咧？頭先譬如 Ken 都有提過一啲網絡安全啦，因為尤其而家呢刻個地緣政治已經咁緊張嘅時候咧，其實網絡安全啊，即係唔同企業或者國家咧對呢方面嘅開支都好緊張啊。咁再加埋其實即係由上年到而家，其實都調整咗可能超過20% 㗎啦。咁變相喺個長遠嘅增長機會同埋嗰個即係個估值嗰個現時嘅估值個吸引性嚟講咧，其實係即係幾吸引嘅。咁亦都可以考慮一啲可能譬如比較即係質素優質啲嘅一啲大型企業啦，係啦，派息啦，甚至中港咧，其實喺個估值上面都可以提供到咧俾一啲增長空間俾投資者嘅。咁即係至於即係其實即係大家最近都好關心即係俄烏嘅衝突啦，咁即係都希望早日可以用一個和平嘅方式去解決啦。咁但係其實即係最近我亦都見到一啲即係社交媒體一啲 post 咧，其實即係有一樣嘢其實都幾可以同大家即係分享下少少啦。其實2年前咧，唔知大家有冇印象啦？2年前咧，其實油咧原來一桶油咧，其實係仲平過一箱水嘅。即係簡單嚟講咧，你買油咧，原來仲平過你買水嘅。咁即係2年前嘅即係個情況，大家係點？可能大家都記得啦，啱啱 Covid 爆發嘅時候啦。即係其實坦白講，唔同嘅地緣政治事件又好，或者係啲不穩定因素都好咧，其實喺過去嚟講咧，其實枕住都會出現嘅。係啦，咁而當即係啱啱開始嘅時候咧，冇錯會對個市場咧可能會有啲衝擊，或者話啲即係有啲震盪喺裏邊，因為大家都唔知道會點樣噶嘛。 咁但係其實當我哋見到過去經驗，其實即係由2次世界大戰以嚟又好，或者最近呢10零年又好，其實每一次嘅政治事件或者地緣政衝突咧，其實未必話會對整體個環球股市又好，美國股市又好咧，其實會帶嚟一啲比較長遠嘅影響，我哋見唔到嘅，係啦，即係可能譬如1個月、3個月、9個月或者1年之後咧，其實整體個表現咧，其實都係 pick up 得翻，即係其實都可以上升翻。咁所以其實我哋見到過去咁多次嘅經驗就係其實地緣政治事件或者一啲衝突咧係可能會有陣痛，但係咧當個穩定性越嚟越高，或者可能譬如而家咁樣越嚟越多一啲可能和談啊，或者係一啲進程係可以俾投資者知道嘅話咧，咁其實大家就可能回歸翻落去一啲基本因素嗰度啦，係啦。咁而調翻轉頭，我哋自己亦都有幾個方向，亦都見到就係今次呢個事件咧，其實係影響唔到。有兩三方面嘅，第一影響唔到美國加息嘅步伐，係啦，即係美國點都會加息㗎啦，係咪？因為始終美國嘅經濟真係有需要加息。咁而喺過去經驗睇到一啲受惠息口上升嘅一啲行業或者板塊咧，其實喺呢方面咧係冇太大影響嘅。咁第二，今次呢個事件咧，亦都未必可以即係改變到中國喺今年比較偏寬鬆嘅一啲貨幣或者係財政政策嚇。咁呢個亦都係對中港股票係有支持嘅。咁而第三就係經過即係最近嘅一啲回調，咁有一啲比較優質啲嘅板塊咧，其實可能已經出現咗啲投資價值喺度。例如可能譬如一啲銀行股，歐洲嘅銀行股相對上咧，而家呢係吸引嘅。咁始終今年都可能會有派息啊，咁今年整體利率都會向上。咁所以其實投資者最緊要喺呢段時間係咩咧？真係可能即係保持冷靜，真係唔好話我即係受好市場個情緒影響，跟住而 panic sell，反而留意翻多少少一啲可能長遠嘅大趨勢，係啦。即係最近呢1個月升得最多嘅，可能好多投資者都會覺得係金啊，或者係油，冇錯，佢哋都有升到嘅，可能升5-6%，有可能升10零個%啦。但係其實升得最多嘅咧，反而係啲咩咧？係一啲新能源嘅投資嚇，最主要就係因為大家見到油價上升，係咪？咁新能源或者即係綠色投資，其實喺嚟緊呢個方向，其實都唔會點樣受到一啲地緣政治事件所影響。咁所以其實我哋今年年頭嘅時候喺我哋嘅展望裏邊都建議大家傾向防守，係啦，分配翻啲資源咧喺一啲防守性啦、大型啦，係啦，有股息有增長嘅企業啦，同埋一啲不可阻擋嘅趨勢，例如可能一啲網絡安全啊，或者係一啲綠色能源嘅投資。咁呢度希望可以幫到大家咧喺長遠嚟講咧係攞到一個即係回報，因為始終個通脹咧係真係要處理嘅。好，咁頭先亦都見到好多問題啦，譬如可能有關內房啊個發展係點啊，或者係個加息啊，希望咧之後可以有再多啲時間同大家再分享啦。咁不過今日嘅時間咧就去到呢度啦。咁都好多謝 Ken 啦。咁thank you Ken so much for your time and sharing your insight with us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
係啦，咁希望大家可以即係身心健康啦，早日抗疫成功啦。咁今日嘅時間去到呢度啦，咁希望好快可以再見到大家。多謝晒，拜拜。
拜拜。